All right, what's next for Israel's war against Hamas? We have people over at Axios, for example, sharing this, that Israel plans to, this is a quote, occupy and flatten all of Gaza if no hostage and ceasefire deal is reached by the end of President Trump's trip to the Middle East. That is from a fellow named Barak Ravid. Dovid Ifun joins us now, and he is the publisher of the New York Sun. And we're going to dive into all this. Now, David, always good to see you.
Likewise, Buck.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, this is from Axios. They're saying that the next phase is to, quote, flatten all of Gaza and occupy it if there's not a full release of all remaining hostages. What can you tell us about the state of this war and what happens next?
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up, Buck. You know, I was in Israel back in 2005 when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. And I hate to take you all the way back, but it is relevant. That was, at the time, Israel governed the whole of the Gaza Strip. There was a lot of international pressure regarding peacemaking. If you listeners will recall, Ariel Sharon was the one who spearheaded this. He actually had to form a new government in order to be able to pull it off. He was encouraged at the time by George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice, but ultimately ended up pulling all Israelis out of the Gaza Strip in 2005. I was there for all the protests. I saw the chaos on the ground. I saw, you know, some of you might remember the orange shirts. That was kind of the banners, and the theme of the protest was color orange. But, you know, people were really screaming and shouting about the disaster that they felt would unfold at the time. And it so happens, you know, since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007, which is just 2 years after that pullout, I've now been in the position where I've basically overseen coverage of 5 different wars in Gaza, 5 different wars in Gaza. And what has become quite apparent, even throughout this latest round, is that if you really do want a scenario where there are no more wars in Gaza, which obviously is good for the people of Israel, but more than the people of Israel, even, it's good for the people in Gaza. You need to get rid of Hamas, and you need to get rid of them completely. You know, to get rid of 80% of Hamas or 90% of Hamas is like getting rid of 80 or 90% of a fire, as some Israeli officials have put it. It will sprout again and will take over again if it is not completely excised. Hamas has taken over every single element of society and living in the Gaza Strip. And, you know, I think at the beginning of this process, it seems the Israelis sort of tried to see if they could figure out how to get Hamas out of the picture using more conventional methods. But it seems that they've arrived at the conclusion that the only way to really do that is to just sweep the slate entirely clean and start from scratch again.
So does it seem like then it is true that is there going to be some occupation of this area that is essentially like a DMZ? Do you think is that going
Right.
to be the plan?
I mean, it certainly looks like they're lining that up as an option. You know, it would be easy for everybody if Hamas just demilitarized, gave up the hostages, stepped out of the picture. But it seems apparent they're not going to do that. And if they aren't going to do that, Israel is basically faced with 2 choices, right? One choice is to kind of continue with the status quo, where Hamas is still placing a stranglehold on how the flow of goods and aid circulate. They're still controlling the lives of a lot of the people in Gaza. They still have the capacity to wage war to some degree. And obviously, if they're left alone, they will continue to be able to do that to a larger degree. So that's option 1. Option 2 is to just, you know, completely take over and remove Hamas from power and everything that relates to it and start again from scratch. And, you know, obviously that's not going to be easy. It's not easy for Israel. They got to put their soldiers into harm's way again. There's a huge mobilization effort now in the south of Israel. I mean, people down there tell me all the tanks are going down, all of the reservists are being called up. I mean, they are mobilizing right now for full-scale war. So it's not easy for Israel. It's not easy for Gazans either, in the sense that, you know, a lot of Gazans have been displaced for a very long time. We're seeing now what I think we've believed for a long time, that a lot of Gazans don't support Hamas. I mean, plenty of Gazans do support Hamas, but there are also Gazans that don't. They're effectively living under a totalitarian regime where Every single aspect of their lives is owned by Hamas. Their food, their medicine, their kids' lives is owned by Hamas. So, it would certainly be a tough period. But if at the end of it there's a scenario where there's no Hamas, and they can start the process of rebuilding with new power structures, at least certainly there's a real opportunity for Israelis to be free and at peace, and also an opportunity for Gazan people to finally live in a scenario where they can have direct relations with the world at large, the wider community, where their kids aren't being recruited for terror all day and all night. They can have open access to information, and maybe create the embers of living in a better world and a better future for themselves and their families.
So is it then accurate, you think, to say that the goal here, the strategy for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, is the destruction of Hamas as an entity? That is accurate, right? If this war goes the
Yeah,
way that it seems to be, it's not beat back Hamas until they are
right.
at a fraction of their normal or general strength.
Yeah,
It is Hamas is effectively an issue no more. Is that
yeah.
accurate?
I mean, that's exactly accurate, and that's why when officials are talking about flattening Gaza, this is not kind of like a salt the earth strategy. It's actually quite pragmatic in the sense that throughout the years that Gaza has been built up in the way that it's been built, Hamas infrastructure has been integrated into absolutely everything and everywhere. I mean, there are super high-end apartment buildings in Gaza that have, Hamas tunnels and Hamas infrastructure built into them. A lot of them were funded by Qatar, by the way. And, it's hard to see a scenario where Qatar wasn't complicit in that. But I mean, the only way to sort of know with certainty that Hamas is gone is really to take an inch by inch approach. And that involves, looking under every stone and every rock and every tunnel and every building, and that's what would be necessary in order to achieve that result. I think it seems to me that is what the Israelis have determined after going at this for nearly 2 years, a year
Well,
and a
yeah,
half.
it's been a long fight already. How much longer do you
Right.
think it will take before they would achieve that objective?
Well, I think when it has gone on for a long time, but just keep in mind that there've been in different phases, right? There've been phases where it's paused for negotiations. There's phase, and then the various short-term deals that have been enacted. But the other thing to keep in mind is that Israeli society and the Israeli army is very much a citizen army. And there are certain requirements that the Israeli government has to keep in mind. So, for example, they can't keep reservists signed up for more than 3 months, right? Some of them, they have businesses, they have families. You have folks like you and me who have day jobs. Suddenly they're called off to go and fight in Gaza. And, some of them are startup entrepreneurs or this or that. They got to be able to come back to that. And then I think also, frankly, part of it is many of the soldiers are students. They're in university. They're finishing the semester. So, on a practical basis, the summer is a better time to mobilize the IDF, which is probably why you're seeing this sort of timeline emerging. But yeah, I mean, if they're at full scale and they're focused on getting the job done, I think it's weeks. Especially being as Hamas is so depleted as it is now.
We'll come back and talk about Iran here in a second with Dovid of the New York Sun. Our sponsor is Birch Gold Group. Tariffs, as you know, cause a little bit of chop in the economy. Things have settled down right now, but we could see some supply chain issues, and inflation is still something that has to be tackled. Gold and silver bullion are excluded from the tariffs and all of that mess that has created some issues in the markets. So these new policies, while there's a little bit of uncertainty around them, allow you an opportunity. The opportunity is to diversify into gold and silver. If you're concerned about your savings, get a free consultation with a Birch Gold precious metal specialist. Text Buck to 989898 and receive your free, no obligation info kit on gold. Learn how to hold gold and silver in a tax sheltered account. Birch Gold will help you convert that existing IRA or 401k into a gold IRA for no money out of pocket. A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of thankful customers. Text my name, Buck, to 989898. Again, text Buck to 989898 to receive your free info kit today. Now, Iran. You've started to hear some talk, Dovid, that even in the U.S. and the Pentagon, there's disagreement about how Iran and its nuclear program should be handled. what are we to think about this? Because for so many years now, I can't even begin to counter track it. We've been told Iran is getting closer. Iran is so close. Iran is closer than it's ever been, right? And we say, okay, well, what are we doing, or what does that mean? What do you think the posture of Israel is right now with the Iranian nuclear program, and what should the Trump administration be doing?
Well, look, first of all, just to put a line under sort of the contrasting visions for how to deal with Iran, the view of the Obama administration, for example, and frankly, at certain times and from certain people in the Trump administration, you hear the same thing. The Europeans, you hear Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, right? The position of the Israelis is Iran cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons capability, which are two completely different ideas. One is that Iran might have the tools in its kitchen to create a nuclear weapon, but we're not going to allow them to push the button. And the Israelis have always maintained, well, that's very risky. You kind of have to trust the Iranians if you're going to allow them to have the whole setup. We want a scenario where they're not just pulling out the plug from the machines, but they are dismantling the machines entirely and the weapons production capability. So that's been kind of a source of a big disagreement for a long time. And, I think in the early days, with Witkoff and others sort of talking about engaging with Iran, they were using similar language to the Obama administration, which certainly had the Israelis alarmed. But more recently, the language has been more precise in the sense that they're saying we don't want to allow nuclear weapons capability. I mean, look, in the end of the day, the best way to deal with this is for the Iranians to understand that they have a really serious amount at stake if they continue to pursue it, and to undo the progress that they've done on their own, which is obviously really difficult. But there is, I would say, a window now, an opportunity now. Iran is incredibly weak and incredibly isolated. The Trump administration has shown its ability to be super tough on Iran in terms of sanctions. And I think if they really ratchet up the pressure, and it seems like they've at least opened up a willingness to do so, there is the possibility of achieving that outcome without, the need for any military intervention. Obviously, having a credible threat for military intervention is part of what it takes to get the Iranians to take this seriously. The other factor, which of course is significant and should not be underestimated at all, is the degree of internal opposition that you have in Iran. And the weakening of the regime by the Trump administration and by the international community, by definition, strengthens the internal opposition within the country. So the two peaceful ways are, pressure that is absolutely excruciating on the Iranian regime that convinces it that it's worth getting rid of the nuclear program, and possibly simultaneously, the strengthening of the internal opposition to the point where regime change is a real threat. But in the end of the day, the military option, needs to be on the table either as a practical last resort, or as a very firm alternative pathway that is presented to the Iranian regime, to the extent that they're looking at these conversations and taking them really seriously.
Let's talk about the campus anti-Semitism stuff here in just a second. But first up, Mother's Day is approaching, and I want to highlight an organization, our sponsor here, that cares deeply about mothers, Preborn. Preborn's network of clinics exists to offer love, life, and support to pregnant women who are feeling scared and alone and are being pressured to make that choice that will not only sacrifice the life of their preborn baby, but take a piece of their heart with it. When a distressed mother comes to Preborn, she is welcomed with open arms and is offered a free ultrasound to hear and see the precious life inside of her. And the majority of the time, she will choose life. This Mother's Day, you can help bring life to both a mother in need and an at-risk baby. One ultrasound is only $28. 5 ultrasounds are $140. And every penny goes toward loving mothers and babies at Preborn. So please consider also becoming a monthly sponsor. Dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, say baby, or visit preborn.com/buck. That's preborn.com/BUCK. I don't know if you saw, but Bill Ackman was talking about that there needs to be some change at Harvard at the very top level. I think in the board of overseers or the whatever it is. You're giving me a face. What you don't like? You want the Harvard board to stay the same? What do you think about this?
I don't know. I think it's insane what's going on there, and I don't want to compare campus to Gaza and Hamas, but these kind of ideas are just so deeply integrated into every level of some of these elite liberal institutions in this country that it's hard to see that any of these changes, superficial changes, are really going to make a difference. I mean, the truth is, you want to change Harvard, you got to fire half the professors and bring in people with alternative views. Now, what are the chances of that happening? You're going to change the overseers. Are they going to do that? Is anybody going to do that? Like, if you really want to have an open-minded institution where you have free debate, free discussion, free ideas, you can't have 98% of all of the personnel being sort of apparatchiks for the Soviets, or whatever the liberal the woke zeitgeist is at that particular time. So the truth is, I think the more realistic pathway is not that Harvard's going to change or Yale's going to change, is that alternative institutions are going to displace them. And you're already seeing sort of what they call the Ivies of the South. I know in the Jewish community, it used to be a huge badge of honor to go to Harvard or Yale or this or that. Now a lot of parents are telling their kids, you know what, pick something else. It's just not worth it. And the truth is, if you have to think about it, big picture, those are very powerful brands, but they should not take for granted just how quickly big brands can become devalued. I mean, you saw what happened with Bud Light or this or that. If that zeitgeist sort of takes hold, the brand of Harvard and the brand of Yale will just not carry the same weight or the same value that they've carried in the past. In the end of the day, frankly, Harvard, Yale, if we're talking about anti-Semitism, they need their Jews more than the Jews need Harvard. That's the truth. Because, if there is a boycott, if people aren't sending their kids there, if Jewish or Israeli professors don't want to teach there, if they don't want to engage in, shared research programs, you'll end up with just this rabble, echo chamber of kind of like radicals, and they'll just, feed off each other and eat each other alive. And, it'll be the end of these great institutions. And certainly what Trump's doing on the money is going to certainly accelerate that decline in a significant way.
Do you agree with that position from Trump, that if these places don't clean up their act, they should stop getting the federal dollars they're getting?
I think so, in the sense that their federal dollars always have strings attached, right? It's not like a given. It's not a right to get money from the government. And like in a lot of these institutions, there's real like reverse discrimination, right? And it's not just Jewish students, but like, I don't know, Christian white men probably feel isolated in a very similar way, and other kind of groups. But you really have a scenario where it's no longer a merits-based system, and it's class-based, or it's race-based, or it's this or that. And to have an expectation then that the U.S. government, namely the taxpayer, you and me, should have to pay for that, it's completely reasonable to say, well, you know what, this is not what how the American people want us to spend their money.
Yeah, absolutely. Our sponsor is IFCJ, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Do you know that just like here in the U.S., Israel has their own Independence Day? In case you missed it, this year's Israel Independence Day was a few days ago on May 1st. But for the people of Israel, freedom is nothing more than a daily struggle just to survive in so many instances. There's no real peace, the continuing war, so many challenges and problems. The Israeli government recognizes the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews for ongoing help to make sure the elderly, the sick, wounded soldiers, and impoverished families don't fall through the cracks. Your gift to the fellowship will provide life-saving aid, medicine, hearty meals, safety, and comfort. Show your support for Israel's independence by making a life-saving gift today. Call to make your gift at 888-488-IFCJ. That's 888-488-4325. Or go online at ifcj.org. Dovid, thanks so much for being here as always. Where folks just go, I assume, NewYorkSun.com, right? Check out the latest you're doing.
NYSun.com. nysun.com.
I'm sorry. I think NY in New York. Yes, NY Sun, NY New York Sun, NY Sun.
We want to make it easier.
.com.
We don't have to ask people to spell out New York.
No, it's fantastic. And how are you doing, by the way? You know, I'm a dad now, and your dad four times over. Before we let you go, what is your year one best bit of, as a veteran of daddom? What is your fatherhood? What is your best advice for year one dad?
Best advice, academics are overrated. Try and put all your focus on values.
All right. Wow. There we go. Dovid Food, everybody.
You're asking me
Thank
on
you.
the spot. I'll give it more thought for the
That's
next
all right.
one.
Hey, we'll take it. Thank you, my friend. Good to see you.